الساعة 11 على ساعتي الساعة 11 لسه ناقص 3 دقايق. ففي ال3 دقايق دول هدي جودي أشكروفت وبيل أشكروفت علم مصر. I've seen this room packed before for Terry Eagleton, for Cinderella, and now for Bill Ashcroft. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to welcome you all today and to welcome Bill and Judy Ashcroft and to thank Professor Mortez Ardeen for being with us every step of the way. Bill and Judy Ashcroft are friends of Egypt. This is their 5th time in Cairo. And they keep drinking of the waters of the Nile, so they will come back again and again and again. He was in India before coming, and he's on his way to Italy. So I am really delighted that in his busy schedule, he managed to fit Cairo on his itinerary. Now, our first keynote speaker, William David Ashcroft, is an Australian professorial fellow and has been professor in School of English Media and Performing Arts at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. We all know that Bill Ashcroft is a prominent critic and theorist, founding exponent of post-colonial theory. His books on post-colonial futures, transformations of colonial culture, writing post-colonialism, and post-colonial transformation, published both in 2001, post-colonial studies, the new concepts in 2007, the Empire Writes Back, are all extremely popular in our Department of English. His work is often quoted in many of our postgraduate seminars. He is author and co-author of 16 books, including 4 second editions, variously translated into 5 languages. He has published over 160 chapters and articles and review articles, and is on the editorial boards of 7 international journals. Now, when he went to the Library of Alexandria, he found only 2 books by him at the library, and I think we need to talk to Ms. Maggie Sulagin about that. Now, I'm wondering how many books are in our own library. So this is something, again, that we need to figure out. Now, without much ado, please join me in welcoming Bill and Judy.
Thank you, Professor Loubna. Thank you for this wonderfully organized conference and for this enthusiastic attendance. These are exciting times, particularly for Egypt, and this is an exciting time to give a paper on creativity and revolution. I want to start with a couple of epigraphs. Martin Luther King says, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Slavoj Žižek says, "I'm a pessimist in the sense that we're approaching dangerous times, but I'm an optimist for exactly the same reason. Pessimism means things are getting messy. Optimism means these are precisely the times when change is possible." Creativity is important to revolution because its function is to inspire hope. Hope for change, hope for freedom, hope for the future. Now, this may not be its goal or purpose. It may have nothing to do with the subject of the creative work. But it functions this way because it affirms that another world is possible. As Mahmoud Darwish says in State of Siege, here on the slopes facing the sunset and the cannon mouth of time, near orchards stripped of their shadows, we do what prisoners do. We do what the unemployed do. We cultivate hope. The creative cultural product is unmatched in its ability to cultivate hope because creativity itself is the act of stepping beyond. As some Rusty puts it, this is how newness enters the world. Simply by imagining the world differently, the creative work shows the possibility of a different world. By speaking of the future, this difference is the key to the importance of art and literature in summoning forth the hope for a better world. We might object that hope is not victory, and indeed the great irony of utopianism is that it's seen that all achieved utopias quickly become dystopias. This fact underlies the considerable disparagement of utopias in the 20th century, the most violent and disruptive in human history, and from which the failed utopia of neoliberalism still rules our world. But without hope, we cannot live. In the colonial context, the pre-independence utopias of soon-to-be liberated post-colonial nations provided a very clear focus for anti-colonial activism. But this appeared to come to an abrupt halt once the goal of that activism was reached and the sombre realities of post-independence political life began to be felt. We can no doubt see evidence of this same process in the Arab Spring. Consequences of revolution may never be quite those that we hoped for, the democracy not quite the utopia we had expected. Nevertheless, the utopianism of creative spirit continues unabated. In his inaugural lecture at Tübingen in 1961 entitled, "Can Hope Be Disappointed?" Ernst Bloch's answer was that even a well-founded hope can be disappointed. Otherwise, it would not be hope. In fact, hope never guarantees anything. It can only be daring and must point to possibilities that will in part depend on chance for their fulfillment. Hope can be frustrated and thwarted, but out of that frustration and disappointment, it can learn to estimate the opposition. Hope can learn through damaging experiences, but it can never be driven off course. Now, revolution has two meanings. It's not simply a revolt, but a revolving spiral into the future. Seeing this, we can understand that the belief in the future doesn't stop with revolution. It remains part of the continuous spiralling of hope. Even if democracy comes, and hope, at least for some, has still been disappointed, creative work continues to spiral into the future, continues the revolution. That movement into the future must first be a movement of the imagination. Now, art and literature have a particular facility for projecting into the future. A Bloch, whose magisterial principle of hope defined the utopian as fundamental to human life. Literature has a significant utopian function because its raison d'etre, its reason for being, is the imaging of a different world, what he calls Vorschein, or anticipatory illumination. Of course, not all creative works are utopian or even necessarily optimistic, but the anticipatory illumination is the revelation of the possibilities for rearranging social and political relations to produce Heimat, Bloch's word for the home that we've all sensed but have never experienced or known. It is Heimat as utopia that determines the truth content of a work of art. Heimat may lie in the future, but the promise of Heimat transforms the present. Heimat suggests, but it's not synonymous with the nation or the democratic state, which may be the object of revolution. As the home we have sensed but never experienced, it remains a constant beacon for the spirit of liberation, even after the goals of revolution appear to have been achieved. What is envisioned as home I'm at in childhood is in actuality the goal of the upright gate towards which human beings strive as they seek to overcome exploitation, humiliation, oppression, and disillusionment. The individual cannot attain such a goal, which is only possible as a collective enterprise. Yet the measure of the individual's ethical backbone can be determined by his or her struggle to stand and walk upright and contribute to the collective goal. This linking of creativity and hope may serve to reconstitute our understanding of resistance, to think of resistance as transformation. In the words of Darwish again, to resist means to be confident of the health of your heart and your balls, to be confident of your incurable malady, the malady of hope. Clearly, creativity is deeply involved in revolution through resistance literature. The concept of resistance literature, Loubna, was first applied in a description of Palestinian literature in 1966 by the Palestinian writer and critic Ghassan Kanafani in his study Literature of Resistance in Occupied Palestine. Kanafani asserts the integral relationship between armed resistance and culture, particularly through resistance literature. As such, literature is seen to be an identifiable and significant accompaniment to the project of political, military and social striving for national liberation. Yet there's a problem with linking literature directly to revolutionary action. Kanafani makes the claim that no research into such literatures can be complete unless the researcher is located within the resistance movement itself, inside the occupied land. Now this invocation of critical exclusivity and insider knowledge is familiar in post-colonial criticism and raises similar questions about the capacity of the literature itself to communicate outside the occupied land. For whom, and to whom, you might ask, does any writer write? Consequently, in the 50 years since Kanafani wrote, and particularly with the emergence of post-colonial studies, it's become very clear that resistance needs to progress beyond mere oppositionality. As Coetzee's protagonist Dawn puts it in thus lines, the answer to a myth, a force, is not necessarily counterforce, for if the myth predicts counterforce, counterforce reinforces the myth. The science of mythography teaches us that the subtler counter is to subvert and revise the myth. The highest propaganda is the propagation of new mythology. The way in which political oppression works is to lock the oppressed into a myth of binary opposition. But this is precisely where music, art and literature demonstrate their power. They take us beyond resistance into the realm of possibility. Indeed, they dare to imagine the impossible. In the words of Darwish again, I believe that the unwavering commitment to resistance and defence is not some sort of nostalgia, but the saturation of the present and future of the past, without which neither present nor future will come to be. And this is a conjoining of past, present and future that I want to talk about in a minute. But an example of this is this sculpture by Farid Amali called Palestinian Rock, which not only appeared in the Documentary 11 exhibition but determined the floor plan. Though apparently simple, it alludes to the rocks that are only weapons available to the incarcerated civilian population. It alludes to Palestinian land occupied by Israel and to the network of relationships between the occupied territories and Palestine proper. It suggests a new kind of mapping of Palestine and the occupied territories based on Deleuzian lines of flight rather than traditional cartography. The key to this piece is not mere resistance, but a vision of connection. Connection within and between the severed parts of Palestine. Whatever the rhetoric, whatever the ways in which history conspires against liberation, the image remains seared on the consciousness. The mesh that completes the rock is the image of the possible impossible. This is the concrete appearance of hope. Now, such utopianism may take a long time to bear fruit. For instance, Naguib Mahfouz's controversial 1959 novel, Al-La Karatina, which I notice is the subject of a session in this conference. In this novel, while an allegory of the failures of the 1952 revolution that inaugurated Nasserism, it's also, according to Ayman El-Dasuki, it anticipates the People's Revolution of 2011. Its experimental style narrativizes popular structures of consciousness of time as the sacred time of revolutionary action, and is offering the outline of a type of knowledge that has been hidden, not just in history, but allegorically in the more recent and present realities of the 1950s, and they may eventually reveal the masses' role in the struggle for power. In other words, the creative impetus of the novel is a projection into the future by means of a vision of the collective struggle for social justice. Now, in the post-colonial context, the most powerful means of overcoming the stalemate of resistance rhetoric, and incidentally of overcoming time, was the transformation of the genres and discourses of colonial powers in order to conceive a liberated future and to speak to the widest possible audience. There's perhaps no more striking demonstration of the power of colonised people to transform the discourses designed to oppress them than the culture which developed in the Caribbean. African slaves were unable to transport their culture or their languages with them to the plantations in any coherent way. Members of the same language group were placed as strangers on plantations, either through the exigencies of the system or to prevent conspiracy. The resulting heterogeneity limited what could be shared culturally, yet Afro-modernity took on a form generated from this heterogeneity, a dynamism adapted to the physical and social conditions with which they had to deal. In this process, both the various slave and non-slave populations absorbed aspects of the various African heritages. What developed was a culture of such creative adaptation that its transformative capacities were able to resist absorption into the dominant culture. This powerful demonstration of agency shows how creativity can be stimulated by conflict. If we accept the definition that creativity is the result of a combination of previously unrelated areas of knowledge, what Arthur Koestler calls bisociation, then conditions of conflict and disruption engendered by colonisation have the potential to enhance creative work. Of course, all subjects of oppression might say, I would rather have freedom than creativity. But can they ever be entirely separated? How free would such a freedom be? Creativity can be the most effective and subtle path to freedom because its utopian dynamic refuses to be locked into the status quo. The post-colonial situation intensifies such conditions of change because the effect of colonial power is the production of hybridisation. Writing from the in-between space of hybridisation, or writers writing from the in-between space of hybridisation, grapple at the same time with the challenges of identity formation and with questions of place, nation and history. These writers envision renewal out of conflict, doing what Amibaba calls borderline work, where conditions of displacement and disjunction have the potential to rewrite boundaries and borders, to reconceive the future in order to reimagine the meaning of human community. This process deploys a radically transformed sense of the relation between memory and the future. The borderline work of culture demands an encounter with newness that is not part of the continuum of past to present. It creates a sense of the new as an insurgent act of cultural translation. Such art does not merely recall the past as social cause or aesthetic precedent, it renews the past, refiguring it as a contingent in-between space that innovates and interrupts the performance of the present. And that reminds us of those lines of Darwish. about past, present, and future. But this diagram leads me to conclude that a proper understanding of the capacity of the creative spirit to anticipate the future requires a rethinking of the nature of time itself. We think of time as either flowing or enduring, and the dismantling of this apparent dichotomy between succession and duration is important for utopian theory. Characteristic of modernity, with its concept of chronological empty time, dislocated from place or human life, is a sense of separation of past, present and future. Although the present may be seen as a continuous stream of prospections becoming retrospections, the sense that the past has gone and the future is coming separates what may be called the three phases of time. Friedrich Kummel proposes that the apparent conflict between time as succession and time as duration in philosophy comes about because we forget that time has no reality apart from the medium of human experience and thought. No single and final definition of time is possible, since such a concept is always conditioned by man's understanding of it. Or as Mahmoud Darwish puts it, time is a river blurred by the tears we gaze through. We think of time as either flowing or enduring, but Kummel makes the point that duration without succession would lose all temporal characteristics. A theory of time, therefore, must understand the correlation of these two principles. Duration arises only from the stream of time, and only within the background of duration is our awareness of succession possible. The critical consequence of this is that if something is to abide, endure, then its past may never be simply past. It must in some way also remain present. By the same token, its future must already somehow be contained in the present. Duration is said to exist only when the three times, put in quotation marks, when used in the sense of past, present and future, not only follow one another, but are all at the same time conjointly present. The coexistence of the times means that a past time does not simply pass away, give way to a present time, but rather that both as different times may exist conjointly, even if not simultaneously. Now, what interests me about this is that I've already made the same observation about function of time in post-colonial literatures. One of the features of post-colonial texts, particularly those from Africa and the Caribbean, is a transformed conception of time that sees it layered and keeps penetrating rather than linear. This conjoining of time in these texts is related to a radically different epistemology, a different way of knowing. And the crucial characteristic of the genre of the novel is, for instance, is its engagement with time. Stories are the way in which we have a world. And the telling of stories appeals to us because they offer the progress of a world in time, and thus can become narratives of temporal order. But magically, by unfolding in time, they take us out of time. It may be that narrative, whose materiality is isomorphic with temporality, provides a way of communicating different experiences of time. How then can the novel convey a different knowledge of time, specifically the knowledge of what has been called the broken time of the traumatized, colonized subject? One way of doing this is through the circular time developed from the forms of old storytelling. But a more common way is to convey experience itself as a palimpsest of different phases.